lot of writers have a preconceived idea in their mind for a book, and then they sit down and they basically write the book that reflects that preconceived idea. But I'm wondering if you could tell me, and you did a lot of research, a lot of data gathering for this book. What surprised you along the way in researching both this history of the origins and growth of the welfare state and the various political and philosophical arguments over it? What surprised you?
It surprised me that I needed to do some of the number crunching I did. I'm not the sort of political scientist who goes in search of tables and graphs and multiple regressions to run. So I started assuming that this question of how big the welfare state really is, how much it's grown, how fast it's grown, that those were sort of fundamental enough questions that with a little digging I would find the competent guy who'd written that up and could avail myself of that book or those books. And maybe I just missed it, and maybe somebody really has done this, and I just never found it out. But I never came across that and wound up sort of doing that myself. And the fact that I needed to surprised me a little bit. It seems, so I thought one of the morals of that story was that too much of the analysis and debating over the welfare state has been done at the microscopic level, and both in terms of the numbers and the arguments. I think more needs to be done at the telescopic level to sort of move back and try to take in the whole picture rather than have these detailed studies of how particular policies will have good effects, bad effects, unintended effects, and so forth. So that was a surprise. Once I'd done the tables and the graphs and the numbers and things, the sort of persistence of the growth, the fact that there is, I mean, there's basically it happens in sort of 3 stages, the growth of the American welfare state. There's the OMB data goes back to 1940, up to about little after the end of the Korean War. All of the effort financially is put into defense, really. There's a huge period of growth between the late 50s and the kind of mid to late 70s. Things really start slowing down, even in the Carter administration. They slow down. The shift of the political winds was apparent even before Reagan was elected, I think. And since then, until at least the Obama presidency, which happened too late for this historical data to measure, then there's a period of sort of slow, incremental, and inertial growth again. So the big boom was in the maybe 8 or 10 years either side of LBJ announcing the Great Society. The persistence, the growth, the relationship, the interesting relationship between economic growth and welfare state growth, I thought was fascinating, and something I wrote some about, and I think more people need to write more about. I mean, it's
that they track one another.
Well,
or that
the kind of dog that doesn't bark thing about them, that you would think that, as best as I can reckon, our real per capita gross domestic product doubles every 30, 32 years or so. You would think that that kind of growth would mean that a society that's twice as wealthy would have fewer people who needed what the welfare state does. That it would, there would be more families who from their own resources could tend to their health, welfare, retirement kind of needs. But in fact, not just in America, but in every society, there seems to be this well-established pattern. If they get richer, they spend more and more on their welfare state. So the growth of the welfare state is really, it's a political and an economic phenomenon. The political thing is that the slice of the pie, the proportion of GDP devoted to welfare state purposes, gets steadily bigger. The economic is that the pie itself gets steadily bigger. So, I mean, and as we were saying, we'll see whether the notion that we're heading into unfavorable economic winds now, and it's going to be a difficult slog economically for a long time to come. Whether this changes the political climate too, and makes people think. I mean, I guess the sort of paradox would be, in a way, the welfare state, there are going to be more people needing more of what it does, but because there'll be less global wealth available, the political environment may be, well, we need to start making restrictions. We've seen just in the past couple of weeks votes that in a Democrat, you know, with large Democratic majorities in Congress seem very surprising. People say, no, we're not going to, these extensions that you're proposing for unemployment compensation and aid to the states, too generous, too lavish under the circumstances. So I thought that was not something I went in expecting to find. And then finally, just, I really did, I mean, the first thing I write in the book is that it's not the book I expected to write, that I really thought that all of liberals' arguments, rhetoric, articles, books, speeches, decrying the insufficiency of the welfare state meant that somebody somewhere had given some thought to the sufficiency, that all of those criticisms pointed to a standard that could be, maybe wasn't laid out explicitly, but could at least be teased out of some arguments. And it's, again, I may be discrediting some theoretician somewhere who's really tried to do this. I mean, the one attempt, really, in a funny sort of way, is John Rawls' A Theory of Justice. But the limits he proposes are so far beyond what any liberal politician who has to answer to voters would even dare to argue for. I mean, the Rawls' limit is that the welfare state is too big when the very poorest person in your society becomes worse off by virtue of the government spending too much money. When you get to that point, then you've gone too far. But only when you get to that point, and you have to keep going until you get there. Well, this is not, even in Sweden, this would sound over the top, sort of, right? So, right. So yeah, so I had to write the book to find all of that out, and none of it I would have guessed at prior to that.
And I've always felt with Rawls that's actually where he departs from his own, from the unreasonable conclusions you could draw from his, from the first principles that he sketches out in A Theory of Justice. I mean, it's what you've had. If you just look at a few of the basic tenets of it, I mean, there are even libertarian arguments that can come out of Rawls, right? I mean, which would be focusing much more on economic growth, raising the living standards of the least well-off, and so that you would want to have policies that encourage that. It was only when Rawls himself was forced to sort of say, well, what do your principles in practice actually mean, that he sketched out what to my mind anyway, was a far more elaborate welfare state, as you point out, certainly even than exists now in Northern Europe, but that would be politically feasible, I think, certainly in the United States or in most countries.
Yes, and not coincidentally, as I mentioned in the book, Rawlsians are often candidates for the faculty senate, but never for the United States Senate. Right. Nobody. I mean, there's Bernie Sanders. If you propose this to him, he would say, "Well, wait, that's crazy. We're not going to do anything like that." You know. So.
Well, listen, Bill. Thank you for taking time to tell us about your book. The book is Never Enough. You can find it in bookstores and at Amazon.com. For American.com, I'm Nick Schultz. Thanks for joining us.